The PlayStation 3 might not have been the overwhelming retail success that its predecessor, the PlayStation 2 was, and neither was it a developer-friendly platform like the later PlayStation 4. The PS3 sits in this weird position in the console world as a pretty revolutionary device that was rarely pushed to its full potential, and I guess you could say the PS3 and the Wii were my childhood, and even though the 7th generation of consoles have grown up, I suppose I haven't yet, so let's go ahead and talk about what makes the PS3 such a special console. So for just a little bit of background, the PS3 came out in November of 2006 to kinda lukewarm reception, mostly thanks to the high price tag. Both the Nintendo Wii and the Xbox 360 also put up a fierce fight around this time, and the PS3 didn't seem to offer a whole lot, except for Blu-ray support, which I'll talk more about in a bit. Anyway, after a few more years, some yellow lights of death, several hardware revisions, and even a slim model, the PS3 started to shape up and see some retail success. And thanks to this, it ended up outselling the Xbox 360 by about 3 million units at the end of its life, which is pretty impressive considering just how rough the PS3's life cycle was. Of course, none of this would have been possible if Sony didn't design hardware that could perform, and that almost ended up being the double-edged sword of the system. Inside the PS3, Sony, as well as Toshiba and IBM, designed a PowerPC-based CPU called the Cell Broadband Engine, which was a very powerful chip for the time, but all of this power came at the cost of being much more difficult to program for than Microsoft's Xbox 360. The Cell processor was paired with the Reality Synthesizer, or RSX GPU, which was a pretty close relative of Nvidia's 7800 GTX. And the big deal here was that it gave the PS3 the ability to output full 1080p HD, which was a pretty impressive feat back in 2006. The PS3 actually ended up having more titles that supported 1080p than the 360 did, and developers also got 256 megabytes of system memory, as well as 256 megabytes of video memory to play around with for their games. Throughout the PS3's life cycle, Sony sold the console with different sized hard drives, starting with 20 and 60 gigabyte drives in the launch model, and eventually going all the way up to 500 gigabytes in some of the last super slim models. Another one of the big gambles that Sony famously took on the PS3 was adding support for their Blu-ray disc format, which actually added a lot to the final cost of the console. In the mid-2000s, Toshiba's HD DVD format was actually a pretty big threat to Blu-ray, but suddenly millions of people were bringing fully capable Blu-ray players into their homes with the PlayStation 3. In fact, this PS3 you see right here is the Blu-ray player that we use in our home theater from about 2008 until we finally got a 4K Blu-ray player sometime about 5 years ago. On the other hand, Microsoft tried selling these external HD DVD player add-ons for the Xbox 360, which, as you might guess, didn't go so well. Of course, this meant that PS3 games were exclusively shipped on Blu-ray discs, so games could take up more space on a single disc, and even for some titles, nothing would have to be installed on the hard drive, which was pretty convenient, especially for the launch 20 and 60 gigabyte models. There were also several different versions of the PS3, all of which have their own pros and cons depending on who you ask. I have each of the 3 major revisions: the Fat Console, the Slim, and the Super Slim, but even each of these were shipped with different CPUs, GPUs, and other features throughout their lifespan. The Fat model right here is probably my favorite in terms of aesthetics, with the silver trim on the front and its overall design making it look more like a really high-end media device than just some game console. And another big difference between this PS3 and some of the other Fat models that came before it is backwards compatibility with PlayStation 2 games. Some PS3s had complete PS2 hardware built right in for backwards compatibility, but these models were very expensive to produce and were eventually replaced with models that weren't compatible with PS2 games, just like this one. We'll also be taking a look at both the PS3 Slim and Super Slim models, which were some of the most reliable and coolest running PS3s that Sony made. Both of mine here have the 45nm cell, along with a 40nm RSX chip, so they're much less prone to failure than the original Fat models. And as these PS3s get older, it's always a good idea to clean them out and put some new thermal paste on both the Cell and RSX, just to try and keep them alive for as long as possible. And obviously this isn't very important for the newer Slim models, but you should definitely make sure you do it on any Fat PS3 models that you come across. I redid all 3 of my consoles just to be on the safe side. Of course, the PS3 also came with a pretty notorious controller. The controller that I have here is the PlayStation 3 6-axis, which is pretty much like the DualShock 2 that came before it and the DualShock 3 that came after it. But of course, this one does not have rumble. This was up to some sort of patent dispute between Sony and a company called Immersion Corporation, but Sony eventually settled and released the DualShock 3 controller later in the PS3's lifecycle. I'm still trying to get one, but for now, the 6-axis controllers are fine, even if they're not as reliable as the newer DualShock 3s. Other than that, this controller has motion tracking, a feature that we also saw in Nintendo's Wii Remote, but here it's not leveraged in nearly as many ways as the Wii Remote's motion features were. The PS3 controller feels alright in the hand. For me, it's maybe not as ergonomic as an Xbox 360 controller, but the D-pad is also way less terrible, so I guess you have to pick and choose. Hooking up the PS3 and turning it on brings us right to the XMB or cross media bar, which really highlights one of the most interesting aspects of the PS3. This wasn't just a game console. This was actually something that Sony was pretty adamant about, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of people ended up taking advantage of it. The XMB feels like a relatively clean and snappy interface even in 2021, and honestly, I like it a lot more than either the current Xbox 360 dashboard or the Wii menu. There's something about how easy it is to navigate the XMB that just wasn't offered by any other console really before or after it in my opinion, or even most media players of the time for that matter. Since about 2011, the PS3 has had the ability to connect to online services like Netflix or even media servers on your local network and play back content in full 1080p HD. It can even decode surround sound formats like DTS HD Master and Dolby True HD. I mean, seriously, this thing was actually very versatile, especially for the time. And remember how I mentioned that we actually used this as our Blu-ray player for a few years? This is why. Sony even came out with a Bluetooth media remote that was designed to let you use the PS3 like a dedicated Blu-ray player. And of course, the Xbox 360 did that as well, but HD DVD. Aside from the media aspect of the PS3 though, this thing was actually a really cool social platform as well, especially as more updates came out throughout the PS3's life. Things like trophy collecting, chat with other PSN users, and free online multiplayer helped to establish PSN as a pretty good competitor to Microsoft's more mature Xbox Live. And of course, you can't really talk about the PS3 without talking about some games. I've got a couple of my favorites that I'll be quickly covering on both a gameplay and technical basis, starting with one of the most groundbreaking, in my opinion, releases on the console, Gran Turismo. The PS3 saw the releases of 4 different Gran Turismo games, though 2 of them, Gran Turismo HD Concept and Gran Turismo 5 Prologue, were basically just demos, while the other 2, Gran Turismo 5 and Gran Turismo 6, were full releases. The Gran Turismo series has always been exclusive to the PlayStation, with Gran Turismo 5 being the best-selling PS3 exclusive on the platform. And honestly, even in 2021, I'm pretty amazed with how well these games hold up today. Graphically, these games were pretty incredible for their time, and 1080p output was only the tip of the iceberg. Compared to Gran Turismo 4 on the PS2, cars had way higher polygon count, and the tracks you can race in were even more detailed than before. GT5 also saw the release of more accessories to the PS3, like the Driving Force GT from Logitech, which helped to sell the game as more of a racing simulator than just another driving game. And Gran Turismo 6 was pretty similar to Gran Turismo 5, with some newer vehicles, new tracks, and an updated user interface. And it's actually interesting here to mention that Gran Turismo 6 came out a couple weeks after the release of the PS4. So it shows that Sony was still dedicated to the platform even after the release of their next-gen console. Another set of games that I've personally really come to like is the Little Big Planet series, which I think takes advantage of the PS3 hardware in a different way, which is arguably just as impressive as Gran Turismo. If you're not familiar, Little Big Planet is essentially a 2.5D platformer which gives you the ability to create and publish your own levels on the internet for other people to play. It also gives you a pretty fun campaign mode to collect objects, which you can then use to build different types of machines and obstacles for your own levels. Even though these games still run at 720p resolution, they still look great in my opinion on a modern flat screen display over HDMI, and I think the gameplay completely makes up for it. The later titles in the series, like Little Big Planet 2, let you play around with things like logic gates and do a whole bunch of crazy things to experiment with level design. I guess in a way it's sort of a similar concept to Roblox on the computer, but with some limitations. It's definitely not for everyone, but I've had loads of fun playing around with it, especially online with a few friends, so I definitely recommend giving it a shot. Unfortunately, a few months ago, the online servers got hit with an attack, and the developers had to take them offline to fix up some security issues. It's been a while since anyone's been able to play online, and we're just hoping that they come... Oh. They're gone. Well, unfortunately, this tends to happen a lot with these older consoles, and I guess it wasn't worth anyone's time to actually fix the PS3 servers, so they're instead just gonna continue maintaining LBP3 servers on the PS4. Good thing I bought a PS5. There are already some people trying to re-implement the servers so we can still play on original PS3 firmware, but only time will tell if these efforts actually find success. The last game that I want to mention here is Destiny, which came out for both the PS3 and PS4 in September of 2014. And honestly, I think that this is another one of those games that shows just how impressive of a console the PS3 is, and how much it was capable of even 8 years after its initial launch. Destiny is essentially a space-themed first-person shooter, an MMO made by Bungie, who you might know as the same guys who put together Halo for the original Xbox. Obviously, at this point, Destiny is an older game, but considering a 7-year-old game still works this good on a 15-year-old console, it's impressive how much this game can pull off. Like Little Big Planet, it runs at 720p, but there's a lot of content to explore, and the online features are still on par with most modern MMOs coming out today, which says something for a console with 256 megabytes of system RAM. Overall, core mechanics like movement and shooting feel good, and the game puts you on a pretty balanced path to progressively upgrade and replace your weapons and gear as you move through content, but at times, some missions can get pretty difficult, which helps to break things up and make sure you don't run through the entire campaign too quickly. I think that Destiny is another great game on the PS3, but it can be hard to recommend games on these older platforms, like Little Big Planet, where it's not certain how much longer the online servers will be maintained. If you can get a cheap copy on disc though, I'd certainly say it's worth giving a try. And I guess that's pretty much it for some of the games that I wanted to highlight on the PS3. Of course, there are a ton of absolutely great games I play all the time that I didn't even mention here, but in the sake of keeping this video from getting too long, that's as far as I think I'll go. The PS3 is really a versatile platform, and honestly, it's been pretty amazing just what developers have been able to do with it for the last 15 years. With that said, there's also an active homebrew scene for the PS3, and it's even possible to run programs like RetroArch and use the PS3 as a complete media center and gaming device. There's obviously a lot more to say here, a lot more than I can fit in this video, but it's already getting kind of long, so I might save it for another episode. The PS3 contains some of the most unique and powerful custom silicon ever put into a game console, and even with its rocky launch, it managed to create a seriously impressive experience for the time. Personally, I think the PS3 is a great console, and if you have the chance, I'd recommend trying to get one just to experience some of the great exclusives that are on the platform. Even today, the PS3 still holds up pretty good as a media device if you're not worried about watching anything in 4K, but considering all the other features and functionality that it offers, it's pretty hard to complain about the PlayStation 3. So, I guess that's about it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about the PlayStation 3 down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Wow, that was a lot of work for my first video.